Aloha, I'm Dan, and today I'm going to talk about racial tensions in Fiji and how those tensions shape the political landscape in the country I'm going to focus on the last 50 years. So let's get started. Um, so Fiji, as you can see, and as you would probably expect, is mostly indigenous Fijians, but there's a large minority of Indians, or Indo-Fijians as some people call them. And this is mainly due to the British colonization back in 1874. Um, Back then, the King of Fiji voluntarily ceded the country to Britain, I imagine mostly for military protection. But as that happened, the British appointed the first governor of Fiji, Sir Arthur Gordon, who really wanted to preserve the Fijians' way of life. And since he didn't want to enslave the Fijians, but the British also needed a productive colony, they imported Indians to serve as indentured servants to work on the sugar plantations. So lucky Fijians got to do a lot of this, and the Indians did a whole lot of that. So anyhow, they imported over 60,000 laborers over almost a 40-year period, and so most of the Indo-Fijians these days are either descendants of those indentured servants, or they immigrated freely, because they had family or for business opportunity as part of the British Commonwealth, so could roam freely there. So yeah, that sort of explains the large Indian minority in Fiji today. Around the time of British colonization, the British sort of set up this great council of chiefs so that, in keeping with Arthur Gordon's preservation of the Fijian way of life, they wanted them to be, have an active role in the government. And so that creation of the Council of Chiefs ensured that they would be able to have a say in the political process. And as you can see in the 90s, they were tasked with appointing the president. They pretty much ran the government. And that, from British colonization on up until almost today, they had a pretty pivotal role in the government. And over the next 100 years, the Fijians, like I said, dominated the political realm, but the Indians kind of, they worked a lot, and they ended up really today kind of running the economic sector in the country. They have a lot of small businesses, and at a time they gained a majority, and so this, as you'll see, will cause some tensions later on. So we're going to jump to Fijian independence, because this is sort of starts the time of my focus. And in 1970, the British sort of handed the country back over to the Fijians without a whole lot of fuss. There was some paperwork signed. It was not a violent uprising. It was sort of a friendly, casual thing with a ceremony. And so at this time, though, the Fijians were a minority to the native indigenous Fijians were a minority to the Indo-Fijians. And so as the government starts to shape up, they're getting a little nervous that they might lose their political majority and control there. So this is, how did we end up with this political and social unrest, in the current era? So Ratu Mara was the first prime minister after independence. Like I said, the Fijians are a slight majority. Indo-Fijians are a slight majority. And not too long after independence, you can see that the Indian National Federation Party, which was mostly an Indo-Fijian party won the elections, mostly because the Indians were a majority at the time. But they failed to really put together a government at that time, and so Mara takes over again, and then for that period from 77 to 87, he's kind of back in power, and then in 87, the um, the Indian National Federation Party wins again, and they actually sort of begin to establish a government, and so it's really the first Indian-dominated government in Fiji. But they weren't in power too long. An indigenous Fijian colonel, Rabuka, he stages a coup and ousts the prime minister, who's actually, I believe, was a native Fijian, but he was heading this multiracial government that had just been elected. Anyhow, he's ousted pretty soon after he gets in office, and Rabuka he stages the coup, but then he sort of lays back and he lets an interim government sort of start to form, but he starts to see that that they're going to go back. There's going to be another multiracial group running the government, and he stages another coup like months later, and takes over and declares Fiji a republic. He does all this because he says that he was worried about the Indian-run government being racist, and basically most Fijians were worried about losing power, and so this is why this happened. So let's fast forward to 2000. Another multiracial political party headed by an Indo-Fijian guy. They win the 1999 elections, and Mahendra Chaudhry is in office. But they're talking about doing all this land reform, and this guy George Speight, he lost a bunch of contracts to the new government after the elections, and he goes bankrupt, and he stages his own coup, backed by the Fijian military. He takes the Indian prime minister hostage, along with the whole parliament, and it's like a 2-month-long ordeal. And then eventually all these things kind of unravel, and Bainimarama takes over at the end of this long series of events. This whole thing happens for similar reasons. The Fijians are worried about kind of losing their political majority and their power. The land reform deal was going to be bad for them too, and so the Fijians sort of oust the first real Indo-Fijian prime minister. So then Bainimarama, who was kind of laid back, and he let an interim government take over. He's laid back, out of the cut for a little while. But in 2006, the prime minister at the time was going to sign all these bills that was going to pardon these guys who took a major role in the 2000 coup. Bainimarama, who's head of the military now, doesn't like that, and he demands that they don't sign the papers. Guess what happens? Another coup. And Bainimarama takes over, and he's maintained power. He also disbanded the Great Council of Chiefs, which, as we talked about, this kind of historic, pillar of indigenous Fijian political power. Like I said, they'd been appointing senators and the president for a while, and the vice president at times. Anyhow, he disbands this Great Council of Chiefs. He runs on this ticket, basically, in the recent elections, after he maintained political power for the last 8 years since that 2006 coup. He runs on this ticket to, kind of unite the whole country, get rid of the sort of the old indigenous Fijian-run government with all the sort of perks that they had enjoyed. So he gets the backing of a lot of poorer folks. He's going to do all the social reform, but he's also going to sort of unite the country and get, a real democracy with less racist policies. So that's where we are now. The racial tensions are still high, I believe, and the elections there may or may not have been super fair. But if Bainimarama actually plays out some of the policies and things that he wanted to get done, it could really have a good effect on Fiji as a whole if he can successfully unite the country and sort of calm down the political arena and hopefully avoid another coup in Fiji. So, and really, for all the political unrest there and everything, I think the Fijians and the Indo-Fijians should sort of not have a segregated Senate and have all they have seats now. They have seats that are relegated to Fijians and some that are relegated to Indo-Fijians, and I think that's kind of it's like if we had that in our country in the U.S. if we had some Senate seats designated for black folks or for Hispanic folks or white folks, it would be a big deal. So I think hopefully Fiji and Bainimarama or his predecessor can sort of desegregate Fiji's government and they can move forward in the next few years. So thanks for listening. Bye.